Motivated. What I wanted to talk about today was, again, going back from what we discussed yesterday, which was really just that, or 2 days ago, is just that grounding energy and the concept of what grounds us, right? So many people think about the things that affect our belief system, or the things that influence us. And, you know, a little while ago, I remember saying and talking about just the whole concept of family. And your root chakras, as well as your first chakra, which is your root, and your second, are both really tied into that energy. Not only the energy of what you feel grounded in, but what you feel you can rely on, what you feel connected to, that tribal type of energy. So we talked about ailments that sometimes arise and stem from that, which can be sciatica, arthritis, a lot of joint problems, a lot of hip and knee problems. And these things, it's not to say that if you have these issues that, you know, you don't know who you are, or you're aimlessly walking through life. Not everyone's story is the same, and that's sometimes difficult to remember because, you know, if we think about things, I just had a conversation with a really good friend of mine the other day about this. If we think about things in terms of just the curse that's passed down hereditarily, or just based on your family issues like thyroid issues or diabetes, you know, that can be a curse that a lot of people believe in. Like, God forbid one of your parents dies from something, you know, it's almost written in the stars for you to attract the same. But where do these thoughts come from? And how real are they? How real are we making them? How much are we putting our energy into things just based on what we were raised around? So for example, you know, I've been talking and really thinking about where a lot of my anger and a lot of my frustration used to stem from. And I say used to because it is in the past. It's not to say that these energies won't come up, but I want to be aware and give myself permission at this stage of my life to know the things that may trigger such, right? So in thinking about such, and in thinking about the things that we feel entitled to, all of these things, our belief systems are changing very rapidly nowadays because there's so much information. So I thought about it in terms of what people believe and think that they are. And not only is the art or the science of astrology huge, but all these things like, oh, well, I'm an Aries or I'm a Virgo, so I'm supposed to be like this, or I'm supposed to do things like that. And those things aren't necessarily true. Like, the true adept knows that no equation necessarily is or applies to us solely. You know, everything is really in flux based on not only what you believe, but also who you think you are. So I don't want to say that a lot of people's beliefs are wrong, but it's almost limiting to think that because your sun sign is one way, you're going to behave a certain way or expected to think a certain way. So that was one thing that I wanted to think about, because these core beliefs of what we think that we're owed, or what we think you know, is owed to us, you know, is huge. The sense of entitlement is huge. And I think that that concept, we all do it, stems from a lot of knowledge. It stems from knowledge sometimes digested improperly. And what I might mean by that is, just because we know certain things doesn't mean that we're allotted the things that come with, right? For example, just because we have college degrees and like masters doesn't equate to us getting jobs after we graduate. We all know these things, but what happens to the emotional body when we aren't actually in alignment with what the cosmos or what these rules actually equate? Like, you know, for me it was, oh, you know, I've only, at least now, I've only been, or why do we feel entitled to a certain sense of whatever because of whatever? And if that's not happening, if that's not given to us, what happens to that energy? So for me, I think growing up in a really, or what seemed to be a very communicative, you know, my Mercury is in Virgo. For people that are into astrology, it says that it's in an exalted space, but I also had a mother who was a Virgo, whose Mercury was in Virgo as well. So I say this to say, we all believed, or at least I came from a family that believed we spoke really well, and that we communicated really well. But just because you talk often, I look to the side because I heard something. Just because you talk doesn't mean that you're getting, or that someone is hearing your point. And I think that that's huge in so many families because, you know, I'm of the ilk that if we can speak about anything, we can get through anything. But that's my belief system. And how often might I have invested in others that I might have been around for a long time, or because they were related to me, I might have expected a certain sense of love or loyalty or return or being there, right? For example, something that I had to honestly deal with was this anger of not having family, right? And I've talked about this before, but how deep were these scars really going, and where is this transference of energy? Because if I'm annoyed and angry every so often, then is my son? Of course, you know, all these things are things that I had to really confront and say, I should be angry. It's okay not to have any grandparents. It's okay to witness, you know, aunts and uncles and cousins. And, you know, I'm in a beautiful environment, but I'm very aware that I somewhat came here to supplement that which I felt depleting in. And in New York, it's not to say that I had a whole surplus, but it's very interesting because I had to humble myself and not place blame on the work that not only I chose to do, but the work that, you know, my son's father was exalted in and still chooses to do. And that work, funny enough, really created a twofold energy system. And it wasn't until I started reading a lot of spiritual texts, just, you know, going back to the Quran and the Bible and, you know, certain teachings of Confucius and certain teachings of Buddha, that I started realizing a lot of people that sometimes go through trials and tribulations in their family are, you know, Teresa, Mother Teresa, Avila, like thinking of certain martyrs, what that energy ensues and what that sometimes comes with. And I started thinking about the work that my son's father does, and it triggered me to say, it's not his or anyone's fault that it created such a clarity and such an energy where, honestly, to confess, there's not a lot of friends that come past the threshold of a door, or that I found myself being able to have companionship with. And over the years, you know, I think that coming from such a healthy high school environment, I knew what that felt like. Let me check and make sure this is taping. Yep, you gotta do that sometimes. I knew what that felt like, and I know what forced energy feels like as well. So going into adulthood, I could honestly say that there was times that I felt like, you know when you're being more invested in certain relationships, even those within your family. So what happens when, you know, you have certain realities that you have to swallow? And that's what I think part of not only dealing with this energy and this sense of community, but when the community is broken, or I feel as though the community is broken, how much of it am I relying on, or is there any that I can rely on? And I realized, like, the first, Amor is going on 9 years old, and you know, I know a lot of people from swim classes and from this and from that I've enrolled in, but to be honest, those are somewhat placing myself in certain environments to attract just other moms and people that have families here, and that's been wonderful. But when you don't have a tribe that you feel understands your language, or that you feel you come from, what ends up happening? And I realized for a lot of years, for at least the first 6-7 years of Amor's life, I was sad that I not only didn't have grandparents, but no aunts and uncles, nobody that was willing to visit, people that just stayed away. And at times I might have, you know, taken that energy out, not only on myself, what am I not doing right? What can I do more of? But the more I seem to give, the less I seem to be able to attract. So that's when I started to really just turn down and up the inner volume and realize that what I was annoyed with was this sense of broken family. And no matter how much I tried to communicate and have family dinners and talk, unless you are around people that want the same, and we all know these things, but really, if people don't want to talk, there is no communication. If someone is frightened to open up, then things are going to remain closed. And that's something that I had to really just swallow and say, I am not without. But when you come from cousins and uncles and aunts and all these things, again, these are excuses to feel like, A, you're not enough, but I did have anger around all the things that I shared, and, you know, all these things. But were these things constitutions of my health and of my energy and how I love myself and all these other things? And how was I compromising my sense of worth just to have, you know, uncles come over or my sister be in my life and all these things? So I just stopped. I stopped feeling as though I had to micromanage, and everything disappeared. Everybody went in their own, and that's what life is, you know? All adults handle their own energy, and unless you have children and people that want to be in your family, you're going to have to figure out. Or some people actually do deal with certain abusive energy or certain energies of not feeling heard or not being respected. So I ended up thinking about it in a reverse way the last 2 years and started to say to myself, instead of thinking about what I don't have and what I wish I could, that's projecting and displacing a lot of energy, not only onto myself, but onto a more. So the last year, I've really just started thinking about all the things I do have. Even though no one bid it, I have health, I have the ability to this, I have the ability to that. And these are things that you have to rewire, because you do feel betrayed if you give and you don't receive. So not only do you deal with those issues of betrayal by admitting that you're angry, but then what next? What next is the whole act of forgiveness, which we touched on. But I wanted to talk about that because forgiveness, when, you know, someone wrongs you, of course, you feel like shit. You want them to be, you know, apologetic or be aware of what they did to you. But not everyone is allotted that grace, and what happens when you're not, right? So the whole act of forgiveness is really knowing that you are part of this energy, whether you wanted it to happen or not, and say to yourself, you know, there's certain things that are out of my control. There's certain things that I'm not going to be able to control the result of. You know, I might have this great family dinner, but then everybody might start arguing and becoming really flippant. I might be there for certain people because I truly love and I truly want, but how do you feel when those besties, you know, specifically just drop the proverbial ball or aren't there? You communicate how you feel, but all of these things. And what I wanted to also apologize to my son for, and I have, was talk about little acts of what we can do to try to not only take responsibility for this energy, but shift it and say to myself or ourselves, you know, I no longer want to think like this. I no longer want to think that it's wrong not to have certain people, you know, want to be in Amor's life, that, you know, Amor never wronged, or he has these amazing, brilliant uncles, but there's just all of these things, like, it's not for me to control. And that was really difficult to come to terms with, and it was difficult to say one is enough, you know, one is going to be enough. And that's something that I had to not only marry within my own energy, but also settle within my life as an adult. Like, I have so much to be grateful for, so why is it, you understand? And then you go right back to those things. Oh, I haven't seen anybody that I knew. I know, well, even when I put myself in Brooklyn or put myself in those spaces, do these things happen? So I kind of played with that energy the last 3 years, and I kind of proved to myself that, you know, I can't galvanize people to want to be, or to want to celebrate great moments, or to want to travel with me, or to want all of these wants and stuff that has nothing to do with taking control of how you react, and also forgiving yourself for believing in the movies, believing in the dreams, believing in, you know, the fact that at baseball games so many other people are there, and no matter how many people you invite, you're just sitting there and cheering, and you know, I do believe, and I did believe that, you know, trust and loyalty is reinforced through community, and that my son would have learned certain things and not, you know, may not have gone through certain things if there were certain people to reinforce my belief system or to love him the way that I love him, right? And I laugh that, you know, when I was younger, loving other people's children is such an allergen, but it's something that not only I pray for, but it's something that is not a bad thing. Like, when people are able to be there and love your children outside of yourself, it's such a sense of peace and reward. And I actually don't know what that feels like, really, outside of myself and his father and one other person, but isn't that enough? And even if that, you know, never is something that I can physically see, or his dad travels, or all of these things, it's to ground oneself and secure oneself in the now.